mob boss went 3 years without touching a woman until he saw her and commanded, "Bring her here." Streets whispered his name with fear. Merchants counted their coins with trembling hands, and even the bravest dared not cross his path. Yet for all the power he commanded, for all the empires he controlled, there was one part of himself that remained locked away, a piece of his soul untouched for 3 long years. He had not touched a woman in all that time. Not out of discipline, not for a vow, but because he had grown afraid. Love, warmth, connection, they had all betrayed him once, leaving scars deeper than any blade. It was easier to rule in darkness than to risk that light again. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that turned the city streets into rivers of glimmering gold from the lanterns overhead. Cale's black car rolled silently through the cobbled lanes, a single figure in a world that feared and worshipped him alike. The driver dared not speak. No one ever did. He arrived at the gathering with the same quiet command he always carried, his presence alone bending the room to his will. Nobles, criminals, and politicians all shared space under the chandelier's dim glow, but Cale was no guest. He was the storm that overshadowed every soul present. And then he saw her. She moved differently from everyone else, light-footed yet unafraid, as though she belonged to a world separate from this one, a world Cale did not know but instinctively wanted to touch. Her hair fell in a dark cascade over her shoulders, and her eyes were a tempest. They did not flinch at him. They did not tremble. They stared, steady and knowing, as though she had been waiting for him all along. Something inside Cale shifted, something long buried. For the first time in years, the cold armor around his heart quivered. "Bring her here." His voice was quiet, but in the room it was absolute. Commands were never questioned, yet tonight, even the usual enforcers hesitated. There was a subtle acknowledgement that he had been broken before, and now, something in his tone carried a storm they had not seen before. The woman, Leora, paused. Her lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but she did not move away. She allowed herself to be brought forward, her steps careful but deliberate. Every eye in the room followed her, but Cale's focus never wavered. The world fell away, leaving only her. When she finally stood before him, Cale felt something he had not in years, a pull he could not name, curiosity, desire, or something darker, something that stirred the shadowed corners of his soul. "You are bold," he said, his voice even but underlined with a tension that made the air itself taut. "I do not fear shadows," she replied simply, her voice calm, yet strong enough to echo in the silent room. Her words were a mirror to him, and he did not like what he saw reflected back. A man who had feared touching life had been tempted by the courage of one woman. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Cale tilted his head, studying her. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, though he already knew she did. She met his gaze without flinching. "I have heard whispers, but whispers cannot tell the truth." That alone sparked a curiosity in him that he had not felt in years. "The truth," she said, and Cale wanted to know it. He motioned, almost unconsciously, for her to follow him to the balcony. Outside, the rain washed the city in silver, and the wind carried the scent of wet stone and burning lanterns. Here, away from prying eyes, Cale allowed himself to look at her fully, for her expression, her posture, the strength she carried like a weapon unseen. "You are not afraid of me," he said. His voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. "I am not afraid of shadows," she said again, her lips curving faintly. Cale's eyes darkened. He was used to fear, used to people bending or breaking before him. But she was different. She did not bend. She did not break. She simply existed, whole and untamed. And for the first time in 3 years, Cale felt the weight of something he had not known he missed: connection. "You do not know what you are tempting," he warned, a flicker of the old darkness threading through his tone. "You do not know the danger that surrounds me, that I carry with me." "I do not fear danger," Leora replied, her gaze steady. "I fear only what I cannot face." Her words were like a dagger and a balm all at once. He knew that fear intimately, but he had buried it deep. Yet now here it was, stirred again by her simple bravery. They walked along the balcony in silence, the rain blurring the city lights below. Cale's mind raced. What was this woman who stirred him so? Who dared to meet him as an equal, unflinching, and yet seemed to understand the weight he carried? She stopped and looked at him, eyes searching. "Why do you command people, yet fear life?" she asked softly. Cale stiffened. How could she see this? How could she name what even he refused to face? "I am not afraid," he said, but the words were hollow even to his own ears. "You are," she said almost tenderly. "You fear what love can do, what trust can do, what connection can do." He wanted to deny her, to lash out with the force that had made him a legend, but the truth burned too brightly inside him. She had seen it, seen him, the man behind the empire, behind the darkness, and in seeing him she had sparked something he had forgotten existed: hope. Cale closed his eyes for a moment, letting the wind wash over him. 3 years, he murmured, 3 years without life. Leora did not ask what he meant. She simply waited, letting the silence stretch between them, heavy and full of unspoken words. "You are dangerous," she said finally, her voice calm, almost amused. "And yet I am not afraid." That statement cut deeper than any blade. Cale had commanded fear his entire life. He had demanded it. He had thrived on it. And yet here was a woman who did not fear him. Not him. Not the empire he had built on shadows and silence. "You may not survive me," he said, almost whispering now, the shadows around his eyes darkening. "Then I will face it," she replied. The wind swirled around them, and in that moment Cale understood something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He was no longer in control. She had entered his world, and it had changed everything. He took a step closer, just enough to feel her presence fully, to hear her breath mingle with his. For 3 years he had not touched life. Now he stood on the edge of something he could not name but could not resist. "You have seen me," he said, voice low, dangerous, and tentative all at once. "And yet you do not run. Why?" "Because I do not fear shadows," she said again, her eyes steady on his, unwavering. "And because I have felt something in you, something you refuse to give to yourself." Cale's chest tightened. He did not know whether to fear her, desire her, or both. He had not felt this in years. He had not felt anything that could pierce the walls he had built. And now she had done it without a single touch, without a single word beyond what was necessary. The rain slowed, leaving only the soft drizzle that painted the city in silver. For a moment they stood there, the world quiet around them, the weight of what had passed and what was to come pressing in. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to him, "You have touched no one for years, yet I have felt you." Cale's hand tightened almost unconsciously. The words, so simple, struck him harder than any threat, any attack, any betrayal he had endured. She had seen him. She had touched him in a way no one else could. He knew in that moment that his world had shifted. He could not turn back. He could not forget. He could not ignore what she had done, what she had awoken. And so, in the silence of the rain, with the city asleep beneath them, Cale Draven, the shadow, the ruler, the untouchable, felt something stir in his heart for the first time in 3 years. Something fragile, dangerous, and utterly uncontrollable. Something called hope. The city never truly slept, but tonight it seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Cale Draven returned to his towering estate, a fortress built of stone, steel, and whispers. Yet even within the high walls and locked gates, he could not shake the memory of Leora, the way she had looked at him, the courage in her eyes, the storm that stirred in his chest. He had commanded her to come, and she had obeyed. Yet she had not bowed, not flinched, not trembled. She had stood like a flame in the shadows of his world, daring him to face himself. For days, Cale could think of nothing else. He wandered the corridors of his estate like a ghost, the memory of her voice echoing in his mind. He knew he should forget her, that this attraction could be dangerous, unpredictable, even. But the harder he tried to suppress it, the more it burned inside him. The next night, she arrived at the gates of his world again, but this time by her own choice. Leora did not belong to the shadows of Kale's empire. She was something else entirely, unbound by fear, unbound by rules, unbound by the city's darkness. "You summoned me," she said, standing tall beneath the lantern light. "Why?" Kale studied her, trying to measure her strength, her courage, her truth. "Because I must know why you do not fear me," he replied. "Why you are not afraid of what I am." "I am afraid," she admitted softly. "But fear does not control me, not like it does you." His gaze sharpened. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his allies, not his enemies, not even the people he trusted most. There was a danger in her words, a challenge that both intrigued and terrified him. Kale gestured toward the courtyard. "Walk with me," he said. They moved silently, the night heavy with rain and fog, the city lights casting a silver haze over the stone paths. The streets beyond were empty, but Kale could sense the pulse of the city, the secrets, the whispers, the dangers that lurked. "You live in shadows," Leora said, her voice calm, "and yet you fear the light." He froze at her words, the weight of them pressing into him. How could she see him so clearly, so fully? He was the mob boss, the shadow king, the man who demanded loyalty and commanded fear. And yet she stripped it all away with a simple observation. "I do not fear the light," he said carefully. "I fear what it reveals." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you should not hide from it." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was filled with the unspoken. Questions, curiosity, recognition, and a strange pull neither could deny. Kale realized with a clarity that startled him that she had entered his life not by chance but by design, and he was powerless to stop it. In the days that followed, Leora became more present in his world. She was not merely a visitor. She became part of the rhythm of the estate, walking its halls, questioning its rules, and challenging Kale's authority in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. She spoke with the staff, observed the patterns of his empire, and asked questions that made him think, reflect, and most importantly, feel. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, Kale found himself in the private library of his estate, a place where he had always been alone. Leora had followed quietly, her presence as commanding as ever, though she moved with a grace that suggested she did not intend to dominate. "Why do you keep so many books?" she asked, her fingers tracing the spines as though they were alive. "Knowledge is power," Kale said simply. Yet even as he spoke, he felt the emptiness of the phrase. Knowledge alone could not heal, could not protect, could not reach the parts of him that had been broken. She turned to face him, her eyes searching. "And yet for all this knowledge you seem lost." He could not argue. She was right. He had ruled the city, commanded loyalty, and built empires, but in matters of the heart, in matters of trust and connection, he was adrift. "You are dangerous," he said, almost as a warning. "You enter a world of shadows and expect to survive unscathed." "I do not expect survival," she said softly. "I expect understanding, I expect truth, and perhaps a chance to change things." Her words stirred something long buried in him. Change was a word he had not allowed himself to consider in years. He had ruled, survived, and endured. But to change, to allow light into the darkness, that was a risk he had not taken since, long ago. Days turned into nights and the tension between them grew. Not the kind of tension that erupted in anger, but the quiet, insistent pull of two souls orbiting the same shadowed core. Kale found himself observing her when she thought he was not looking, the way her eyes held curiosity, the gentle precision of her movements, the unspoken strength that made her presence almost magnetic. One night as a storm rolled over the city, lightning illuminating the estate in brief flashes, Kale found Leora standing at the balcony, gazing into the dark streets below. "You came here alone," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Even in this storm." "I am not afraid of storms," she replied, her hair whipping around her face in the wind. "Nor shadows." Kale stepped closer, the storm reflecting the turmoil inside him. "You should be," he said. "Everything in my world is dangerous. You do not belong here." "I belong wherever I choose," she said firmly, turning to meet his gaze. "And I have chosen here. I have chosen you." The words struck him with the force of a revelation. No one had ever spoken to him with such certainty, such courage. And yet, even as he felt the pull toward her, he resisted. The shadows of his past, the fear of loss, and the weight of his own darkness warned him to retreat. "You are not like the others," he said quietly, "and that makes you dangerous." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, "and yet I am not afraid of you." For the first time in years, Kale felt an unfamiliar tension, not the tension of control, but the tension of vulnerability. He had spent so long mastering fear, wielding it like a weapon, and now he was confronted by someone who did not fear him at all. Days later, the city faced a sudden threat, a rival faction attempting to challenge Kale's authority. While his men prepared for battle, Kale found himself thinking of Leora. She had warned him of the risks, had spoken of the fragility of control and the power of trust. And in that moment he realized something important. She had changed the way he saw everything, even power and loyalty. During the confrontation, Leora moved with unexpected skill, not as a fighter but as a strategist. She anticipated moves, guided his decisions, and saved lives with insight Kale had not expected. Through her, he began to see a different path, a path where power did not have to come from fear, where loyalty could come from respect, and where strength could be paired with compassion. After the conflict was resolved, Kale and Leora stood together on the rooftop of his estate. The city sprawled beneath them, quiet once more. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glimmering under the moonlight. "You have changed me," he admitted quietly, almost reluctantly. "I did not think anyone could. I only showed you what you already feared to see," she replied softly. The man beneath the shadow. Kale's heart tightened. He had built walls so high that even he had forgotten what lay inside. And now she was inside, touching parts of him he had not allowed anyone to reach. "You cannot stay forever," he said, though even as he spoke, he knew he did not want her to leave. "This world, it is not safe for someone like you." "I will stay," she said simply. "Because I choose to." Her choice struck him with a mixture of awe and fear. She was not bound by him, and yet she had chosen to enter his world, to walk beside him in the shadows he had ruled alone. That night, as Kale walked alone through the halls of his estate, he realized that his life had changed in ways he could not yet understand. Leora had entered his world, not as a prize, not as a pawn, but as an equal, a force that challenged him, questioned him, and awakened something he had long buried. And for the first time in years, Kale wondered if he could survive this change. The city streets were quieter than usual, but in the shadows, whispers moved faster than the wind. Kale Draven sensed the tension before he even saw it, the distant echo of footsteps that did not belong, the faint trace of fear in those who should have known no fear. Leora had warned him that her past was never far behind, and now it had found them. In the dim light of his private study, Kale studied the message brought by the messenger earlier, a simple note, yet heavy with meaning. "She is not safe. The curse follows her." The words burned in his mind. He did not fully understand the curse, nor did he yet know its origin. But one thing was certain. Leora's presence in his life had stirred forces older and darker than he had imagined. Kale paced, the weight of his own fear pressing against him. He had faced enemies of flesh and blood, enemies who had tried to destroy him with violence and betrayal. But this was different. This was something older, something hidden in shadow and magic, and he realized with a quiet, sinking dread that he could not protect her with strength alone. The next evening, Leora appeared at his estate once more, as calm and unafraid as ever. Kale could see the faint tremor in her hands, barely visible, but he knew it was there. The curse she carried was not just a story. It was alive, and it sought to pull her away, to consume what little peace they might have found together. "You received the message," she said softly, eyes meeting his. "I feared this day would come. I do not know how to fight this," Kale admitted, his voice low, even vulnerable. "I have controlled everything in my life, but this is beyond me." Leora stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we will face it together," she said. "You are stronger than you know, and I will not be alone in this." Her presence grounded him. Kale had always been a man of power, but never of trust. Yet now, standing beside her, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years: hope. The following days were a blur of preparation and investigation. Kale summoned his most trusted allies, though he kept the nature of the threat vague. He could not explain fully. Magic and curses were foreign to most, and fear often clouded reason. Yet Leora guided him, revealing fragments of her past, hints about the curse, its origin, and the one who had bound her to it. "It was not meant to harm," she explained one night as they pored over ancient texts in his private library. "It was meant to protect, but protection became imprisonment, and now it seeks to claim me completely." Kale frowned, frustration rising. "Protection from what?" "From whom?" She shook her head, her hair falling across her face. "From what you might not understand yet. From forces that move in the shadows, even older than your city." He leaned back, the words heavy in his chest. Kale had always believed he understood power, influence, control. But this was different. The city, his empire, his people, they were all small pieces compared to the force that now threatened Leora. "Then we must learn," he said finally. "We must understand it before it is too late." They began a journey into the underbelly of the city, tracing rumors, whispers, and signs that pointed to a forgotten past. Abandoned temples, hidden chambers, and ruins long swallowed by time became their path. Kale moved with caution, but Leora led with confidence, her knowledge of the old ways guiding them through the darkness. During their search, Kale learned more than he had expected, not just about the curse, but about Leora herself. She was not just a victim. She was a protector, a seeker of truth, and someone who bore burdens willingly to shield others. Every revelation drew him closer, not just to her story, but to the woman herself. Her courage, resilience, and unwavering morality contrasted sharply with the life he had led. "You do not have to carry this alone," he told her one night, as they rested in a hidden chamber beneath the city. Candles flickered against the stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed alive. "I do not ask for help," she said quietly, "but I will not refuse it either. If you choose to stand with me, then stand fully. No half measures, Kale Draven, no walls between us." He stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. The walls he had built over 3 years, the walls of fear, of control, of loneliness, felt fragile under the strength of her gaze. He wanted to take her words to heart, but the fear of failure, of loss, pressed against his chest like iron. The nights became darker, the threats more apparent. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Whispers followed them in empty streets. And then one night it happened. A figure appeared in the ruins where they had sought refuge, a tall silhouette, cloaked in black, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Leora froze, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You should not have come," she whispered. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the figure. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice carried authority, but underneath it lay a tremor of fear he could not fully hide. The figure stepped closer, and Kale could see the faint shimmer of a curse woven into the edges of their cloak. "I am the guardian of what you cannot escape," the figure said, voice hollow and echoing. "She belongs to the old ways, and she cannot remain free without facing the cost." Kale's heart pounded. He had faced rivals, enemies, assassins, and traitors, but this was different. This was not about fear or loyalty. This was about forces beyond understanding, and he realized with a sinking clarity that Leora's life, and perhaps his own, depended on choices he had never been forced to make before. "You cannot take her," he said, voice steady even as his blood ran cold. "I will not allow it." The figure paused as if studying him, weighing the depths of his resolve. "Then you will face the consequences," it said. And with a gesture, shadows rose from the ground, twisting into forms both beautiful and terrifying, surrounding them in a world where reality and the supernatural blurred. Leora stepped closer to Kale, her hand brushing his arm. "Do not let fear control you," she whispered. "Trust in yourself and in me." Kale's eyes met hers. In that moment he realized that trust was more than belief. It was surrender. Surrender to the unknown, to the vulnerability he had denied himself for so long. And he understood that to save her, he could not rely solely on power or violence. He needed something he had not practiced in years: faith in another and faith in himself. The battle that followed was not one of fists or weapons, but of courage and will. Shadows tested him, whispered doubts and fears that clawed at his mind, yet Kale held fast. He felt Leora's presence beside him, steady and unwavering, guiding him, reminding him that they were stronger together. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time seemed to warp in the shifting shadows. And then, at the moment when all seemed lost, Kale spoke, not as a ruler, not as a boss, but as a man who had finally allowed himself to feel. "I will not let you harm her," he said, voice ringing with certainty and power, though not the kind he had used before. "Not her, not us, not what we have become together." The shadows recoiled, twisting, and then dispersed as if the strength of his resolve, combined with Leora's courage, had shattered their hold. Silence fell, deep and absolute. Breathing heavily, Kale looked at Leora. She was safe, unharmed, but weary. He felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and something far more potent: care. "You did it," she whispered, her hand finding his. "We did it." Kale's eyes softened. "No," he said quietly, "you did it. You showed me what courage really is and what it means to trust." Leora smiled faintly, though shadows of the night lingered in her eyes. "We are not done," she said softly. "The curse is not fully gone, but now we know we can face it together." Kale nodded, a strange warmth rising within him. For the first time in years he felt something like peace, not complete, not permanent, but enough to understand that he was no longer alone. He had Leora, and together they could face what came next. They left the ruins hand in hand, emerging into the city just as dawn began to paint the sky with soft pinks and golds. The world seemed quieter, gentler, yet brimming with possibility. Kale looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had entered his life and changed it, but a partner, an equal, a guide. And as they walked together into the rising sun, he realized that this was only the beginning. Shadows would always exist, and the curse may yet call again. But now he was no longer afraid. He had found trust, courage, and a reason to face the unknown. The city slept under a blanket of mist, yet the shadows that lingered were heavier than ever. Kale Draven felt the weight of the black feather still on his mind, the silent reminder that the forces they had faced were not yet gone. Leora walked beside him through the quiet streets, her hand lightly brushing his, a comfort and a promise both. They were no longer two strangers in a world of danger. They were partners, bound by trust and the courage to face what lay ahead. "We cannot ignore this," Leora said, her voice soft but firm. "The guardian we faced was only a warning. Whoever or whatever sent this wants to test us further." Kale nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we will face it together." He felt a strange calm, something he had not experienced in years. The fear that had haunted him, the constant shadow of control and suspicion, it had not vanished completely, but it had been tempered by her presence. She had taught him that strength was not only in dominance, but in vulnerability, in trust, and in courage shared. They followed the trail the black feather seemed to point to, a hidden temple at the edge of the city, half buried in fog and twisted vines. The air around it was thick with magic, as though the place itself had memories, waiting for someone to awaken them. Leora's eyes flickered with recognition. "This is it," she whispered, "the place where the curse began and where it can be undone." Kale studied the temple, feeling the weight of its history pressing against him. It was ancient, older than the city itself. The stone walls bore carvings of forgotten creatures, symbols of power and warnings in languages long lost. He had always believed himself in control, but here, confronted with forces beyond his understanding, he realized just how small human power truly was. Inside, the temple was dark, the faint light of torches casting moving shadows on the walls. The air was thick, almost alive, humming with anticipation. As they stepped further in, Kale noticed symbols etched into the stone floor, signs of a binding spell, intricate and old. He felt a chill, a warning from the world itself. "You must be ready," Leora said, turning to him. "This is not just about courage, it is about truth, about facing who we really are." Kale's mind raced. He had faced betrayal, enemies, and death, but truth was another matter entirely. The truth about himself, about the mistakes he had made, the lives he had hurt, the walls he had built around his heart. Yet, standing here with her, he realized that he could not face this alone. He had to trust, not just her but himself. As they reached the center of the temple, the shadows shifted. The air thickened, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the guardian from before, but this time larger, more imposing, its eyes glowing like molten silver. Around it swirled a storm of shadows, tendrils reaching for them, testing, probing, seeking weakness. Kale stepped forward, placing himself in front of Leora. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. But this time his strength was not just force, it was resolve, a calm certainty grounded in trust and love. The guardian spoke, its voice like wind through stone. "To break the curse, one must face the darkness within themselves. Only then can the bond be freed." Kale felt the weight of the words. Darkness within himself. He thought of the years he had spent in fear, in isolation, the walls he had built around his heart, the choices he had made to protect himself. All of it led to this moment, a reckoning not just with the curse but with who he had been. Leora took his hand, her grip firm, steadying. "You are not alone," she whispered. "We face it together." Kale closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. The shadows rose around them, cold and insistent, trying to push him back, to draw him into doubt, fear, and anger. But he focused on Leora, on the warmth of her hand, the strength in her eyes. He thought of the man he wanted to become, not the mob boss, not the shadow king, but a man who could love, trust, and protect without losing himself to darkness. "I see the darkness," he said, his voice steady. "I see my fear, my anger, my regrets. But I do not let it control me." The shadows hesitated, then surged again. The guardian moved closer, and Kale felt the weight of every choice, every mistake he had ever made pressing against him. Yet in the midst of it, he felt a strange clarity. The darkness was part of him, but it did not define him. He could face it, and he could choose differently. Leora stepped closer. "And I face it with you," she said. "We are stronger together than we are apart." Together they faced the shadows, their hands clasped, their hearts aligned. The air pulsed with energy, the walls of the temple trembling as the ancient magic recognized their resolve. Kale spoke again, not as a man who demanded fear, but as one who offered trust. "I accept who I am. I accept my darkness, and I choose the light within me." The guardian paused, its eyes searching, then slowly, the shadows began to recede. The storm of darkness dissolved into threads of silver light, weaving around Kale and Leora until the chamber was filled with a soft, golden glow. Leora exhaled, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's done," she whispered. "The curse is broken." Kale lowered his gaze, feeling the weight lift from the world, from his chest, from his heart. He had faced his fears, his regrets, and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, changed, and renewed. He turned to Leora. You were my strength," he said quietly. "Even when I thought I could stand alone, it was you who showed me the way." She smiled, brushing a damp strand of hair from his face. "And you were mine," she said. "We faced it together. That is what matters." The temple, once dark and threatening, now seemed alive with peace. Light poured through cracks in the stone, illuminating the carvings and symbols in a new way. Kale realized that the city outside, with all its dangers and shadows, could also be changed, if he allowed himself to lead not with fear but with understanding. As they walked back into the streets, hand in hand, the city seemed softer, warmer. The fog lifted, revealing the buildings in gold and silver under the rising sun. Kale breathed deeply, feeling the air as if for the first time in years. He understood now that power was not only about fear or control. It was about responsibility, courage, and connection. And he understood, more clearly than ever, that the woman by his side had shown him a world he had thought lost forever. Days passed and the city slowly returned to its rhythm. Kale resumed his role, but differently now. He was still the shadow that commanded respect, still the man who ruled with strength, but he was no longer alone. Leora was with him, a partner, a guide, and a presence that made him better. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony of the estate, watching the sunset paint the city in pinks and golds, Kale spoke quietly. "We have faced darkness, shadows, and curses," he said. "And yet we remain." Leora leaned into him. "Yes, and we will face whatever comes next, together." Kale nodded, feeling the warmth of her presence settle into him, a light that would not be extinguished. He realized that life, with all its uncertainty, was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. For the first time in years, he did not feel the need to command, to dominate, or to hide. He only felt the need to protect, to trust, and to love. A love forged in shadows, tested by darkness, and tempered by courage. The city below shimmered in the twilight, unaware of the battles fought, the curses broken, and the transformation of the man who had once ruled it through fear alone. Kale felt no desire to hide, no need to retreat into shadows. The world was wide, dangerous, beautiful, and full of possibility, and he would face it all with Leora at his side. The black feather that had haunted him disappeared, carried away by the wind. It was a small thing, yet its absence symbolized the change they had achieved. The curse was gone, but the lessons remained, lessons of courage, trust, and the power of facing darkness together. Kale turned to Leora, his eyes soft yet strong. "You have given me more than freedom," he said. "You have given me hope, and I will not waste it." Leora smiled, her hand finding his. "Then let us walk forward," she said, "into whatever comes next together." And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in gold and shadow, Kale Draven, the Shadow King, the man who had ruled through fear, took his first steps into a life transformed. Not alone, not hidden, not afraid. He had faced the darkness. He had found the light. And he had found love, the kind that did not weaken but strengthened, healed, and endured. The city was vast, its secrets endless, but for the first time Kale knew that whatever came, he would face it with courage, hope, and the woman who had changed his world forever.